So how do you create multiple pieces of content for your podcast so that you can promote it? How's it going? My name is Shannon, and I'm the podcast therapist, and you're listening to the Podcast Therapist podcast itself. And so today's question really stems from last week's episode. If you missed that episode, I'm going to go ahead and leave it over in the top corner of my YouTube video. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, I'll try to leave it in the show notes for you as well. But it's all based on last week's episode, and I want to continue the conversation about this, all right? So I mentioned a couple tools last week in my episode where I said I use Descript and I use TurboScribe to create content for myself so that I can go ahead and promote my own podcast. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Life has happened. Things have happened in my life. It's almost as though you could probably relate, right? One day, everything is normal, and then the next day, everything turns upside down. And in my life, that is kind of what has happened. But I'm still committed to creating some content for you guys so I can help you with your podcast. So I mentioned these two tools, Descript and TurboScribe, and I got a question, an email, asking whether or not, which one is going to be best to use. So we're going to jump into that here in a second. But if you're a podcaster just jumping onto this video for the very first time, welcome. And we have to ask the question for you, all right? If you ever feel that your podcast takes forever to create, how is it that you have to make the time to create promotional content for your podcast? We covered that in the last episode, but we can highlight them again. Maybe you're spending more hours recording and editing your podcast, but you struggle to get the content to push it out there, right? You see other people or other people on platforms, they're posting clips, they're doing social media content, they're doing blogs completely effortlessly, and you're just like, what? Do they have a brother? Do they have some relative that is helping them out? And then maybe you try to repurpose content, but it completely feels overwhelming, and you just really don't know where to start. Now, I think a lot of podcasters, for the most part, have figured this part out. There's video after video on the internet that basically shows how to do this. But it's just is all based in the philosophy in which you are creating the content. Now, why does this all matter for you? All right. Now, if you're only publishing full-length episodes without actually repurposing them, you're missing out on listeners who might actually find you on these platforms. Okay. So we're going to dive into this. I'm going to go ahead and read to you the email that I have gone ahead and gotten. And it was from one of you guys. His name is John. And John has a podcast, a heavy metal podcast, and he creates all kinds of great content for his niche, which is our people who listen to heavy metal. All right. His email, in short, basically says, "Hey, Shannon, I've been using Descript for a while, but I recently tried TurboScribe. If I upgrade, will the interface on TurboScribe be more detailed and user-friendly? Are there advantages beyond the price? And how familiar are you with both?" All right. Now, this is really a great question to ask. All right. Now, John has the struggle. This is his struggle. It's everyone's struggle. It's John's struggle equals every podcaster's struggle is finding the right tool to repurpose content efficiently. And then, of course, his question is, what is the perfect setup for this? How can I create the perfect setup for this? Should podcasters use TurboScribe and Descript, or should they use both? So let's go ahead and break down the best approach for your podcast workflow on this week's episode of the Podcast Therapist.
When you're one unbalanced piece of audio from losing your... This is the Podcast Therapist.
That is right. And of course, as we jump into today's topic, I want to remind you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you're watching this on YouTube. There's a little button right there on your screen where you can hit subscribe, and make sure you hit that bell button to go ahead and get notified when I drop a brand new podcast episode. And of course, if you need any details on the topics that I talk about in this episode, they are down in the description below. For audio listeners, it's all in the show notes for yourself. You can still hit that follow button and follow the podcast as well as I try to get out more beneficial podcast content for you. All right. Now, let's go ahead and jump into this topic. All right. We're talking about the key differences between Descript and TurboScribe and why I mentioned using both, because both at face value seem as though they do close to the same amount of things, except for one. One app doesn't do what the other does. And I would say that it's TurboScribe does not do the video portion that Descript does. So I want to break down the differences for you on this, all right? So the reasons why I use TurboScribe is that you get unlimited transcriptions. That's a huge, huge thing for me because I'm using transcriptions beyond just my own regular podcasting that I need to get done, all right? I use TurboScribe for note-taking. I use it for blogs, and I use it for repurposing. Because the fact that it has unlimited transcriptions, it allows me to upload as much audio as I want and transcribe those down and maybe organize better notes. And so I will tell you this, I'm using it in tandem with AI. So I'm not replacing any blogs with AI. Well, I wouldn't say I wouldn't be replacing blogs with AI, but I'm utilizing AI with this particular feature so that I can create specific pieces of content. All right. So, and in my opinion, TurboScribe is a little bit faster and accurate compared to Descript. So the transcriptions seem to be a little more accurate, and it automatically takes out all the filler words. In Descript, you have to go in and you have to manually remove those. And so that becomes a little bit of a challenge. Now, how accurate it is in terms of grammatics, I would say that TurboScribe is still edges out, it levels it out a little bit more than I wouldn't say it levels it out, but it edges it out a little bit more than Descript. So that's why I'm using something like TurboScribe. And please don't confuse the fact that I think that Descript doesn't have a quality transcription service that they're using. I would just say that when you're trying to work in a better workflow, you got to do the workflow that works best for you. And like I said, I'm using TurboScribe to create a better workflow for myself outside of podcasting. Okay. Now, TurboScribe also has AI-powered social media prompts. They give you the prompts inside of TurboScribe. Now, I know Descript does the exact same thing, but still, I like to use TurboScribe because of the social media prompts that it gives you. It automatically generates a ChatGPT ready prompt for you to create posts for X, LinkedIn, Facebook, and I've really kind of customized it for myself. I'm utilizing it for Threads. I am utilizing it for LinkedIn, and I might start utilizing it for Substack. I've recently started a Substack, and so I will probably end up using things for Substack as well. All right, so there are specific reasons. Let me just break it down real quick. I like the unlimited transcriptions. I think it's a little bit faster, and in my experience, it's a little bit more accurate in terms of the transcriptions are concerned. And I love those social media prompts that it gives, and it gives you a bunch of them, especially when you start plugging these into ChatGPT. All right. Now, this is a reason why I still use Descript. So I'm using both of these platforms, but this is the reason why I'm still using Descript, is that it's still a powerful tool when it comes to podcasting, whether it's video podcasts or audio podcasts. I love the features that it has available on it to where I can still create video inside of there. If you're to compare this to something, say like Adobe Premiere, or back in the day I was using ScreenFlow, I would say that Descript it has all the tools in one. It's all in one. I can create YouTube shorts. I could do so many things so much faster. I can edit by looking at the text that's on the screen and create those clips as needed. So if I wanted to create YouTube shorts, if I wanted to go ahead and create reels for Instagram or TikTok, that would be the reasons why I'm using this. But if I wanted to record a video podcast on there, I could as well. I don't necessarily do that. I currently use Ecamm for that, and this is just what my workflow looks like. Okay, but I just still think it is a powerful podcast / video podcast tool. There are many different tools that you can go ahead and use. Descript, still good enough, all right? It's still good for editing, all right? So like I said, it's got the text to video functionality, so great for repurposing for YouTube shorts. And then of course, it does still have those filler word removal and the collaboration tools. It's got the eye tracking that is available on there. And you still can create social media posts within Descript. They have their own AI powered engine called Underlord that works. So, you would really kind of have to play with it. But what I'm trying to get across to you is that you're looking for efficiency in your workflow. So if you have to create some type of efficiency in your workflow, you have to find the right tools that will work best for you so that you can get the best quality content from the content that you're creating, such as a video podcast or an audio podcast. So if I were to give like a straight up verdict on this, should you pick one or should you pick both? It's going to be up to you. If you need something like an unlimited AI powered transcription TurboScribe might be the better fit for you. But if you need something that's a little more high-end editing, you need video capabilities, I would say you need to have Descript. It's a must-have in your podcast workflow, okay? You can check out Descript. I got a link down in the description of this particular video if you want to go ahead and check that out, and I'll leave it in the audio podcast show notes as well. Now, the best workflow that I have come across is that I use both in tandem, simultaneously. Obviously, transcriptions, I will use TurboScribe and Descript for YouTube Shorts editing and creating multiple clips. Last week, I made multiple clips for a previous podcast that I'm going to schedule out and utilizing a scheduling tool. All right, so you got to figure out and ask yourself the question, like, which tool is going to align with your workflow, or is it both? I understand that there may be budget conscious people out there that are looking for something. I don't want to spend money on another tool. But then there are people who are like, well, I'm willing to spend the money on the tool because it improves my workflow. You just kind of have to work it out for yourself. If you think as though Descript is going to be the tool that you're going to need and use for your podcast editing or content creation, then maybe that you just stick with that. But if you're looking for something that improves upon the current workflow, then maybe you add in something such as TurboScribe. Now, I want to dive into the deeper issue of why podcasters struggle to repurpose content, because they see repurposing content as a separate task, right? They see it as part of the workflow, and that can be very difficult to understand. They try to do everything manually instead of using automation or AI. I will say this when it comes down to AI, and I've tried to explain it to friends of mine and other content creators, and I say that AI, to me, in my eyes, is not the replacement of a person. In other words, you can't ask it to write a blog for you. Just, hey, write a blog without giving it context. And you have to give AI context before you can start repurposing the content to create any type of blog. There, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as I've read on the internet, I can't remember if I read it on Forbes or if I read it on some article on Search Engine Journal. I can't remember. But either way, I do know that no one is stopping you from creating a blog inside of, say, ChatGPT. However, I will add to this is that you need to provide it context. You need to provide it the appropriate context and prompt so that it can help you write that blog content. All right. I publish a blog for my particular podcast every week. It usually comes out on Friday or Saturday, and it is generated through the help of ChatGPT because I've crafted the prompts from TurboScribe, and it has allowed me to create a better blog post. It makes more sense that way. And it is in my words. It's not something that ChatGPT came up with. It's in my words, and it follows the logic in my transcription and how I've structured it based on what I've recorded. It will transcribe it in my same tone and how I've read it or how I've spoken it. And that's what makes the difference in how I can create these blog posts. All right. So podcasters, they typically think that the repurposing is the extra work, but in reality, it's more about saving yourself time and figuring out that workflow, right? So it's all about a mindset shift. So your podcast just isn't a podcast. It's more about creating a content machine. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this. He talked about this. Well, he's been talking about it for years, but you can't tell me that you haven't run across a content creator that has told you start with video and then start chunking down the other repurposed pieces of content from video to audio to text to tweets to whatever. And you're just chunking that all down, right? And with the tools that we have available to us within AI, that makes it easier than ever to go ahead and do that. So this is all about a mindset shift. So once you shift your mindset about how we look at this, then the repurposing can be really, really easy. Now, let's talk about how we repurpose the content efficiently, all right? Now, if you want to automate your transcriptions and show notes, okay, I would say for me, this is what my workflow looks like, all right? You're using TurboScribe because it's instantly going to transcribe that and it summarizes the podcast episodes if you want that to happen, all right? I would say that when you upload into TurboScribe, the upload, it's obviously going to take into account the speed of your internet and the size of the file that you are uploading. So I would recommend that if you're going to upload a piece of audio to get transcribed, that you save that piece of audio at a lower bit rate than say 192K or 320K. I would say you look at something like 96K or lower, just as long as it can transcribe, because it takes less time to get that transcription done. And when you're inside of TurboScribe, it gives you 3 options that you're going to take. I think one of them is called whale, another one's cheetah, and those are the options. I can't remember what all of them are, but those are basically the indications of how fast or how accurate you want that transcription to be. So if you want to get a fast transcription, you pick one. I forget if it was cheetah or whatever. If you want to get an accurate transcription, you would pick whale, and it would take a little bit longer. It might take 5 minutes. So you'll see when you get inside of TurboScribe what that looks like, all right? But it's going to transcribe it a lot better, I think, than Descript, all right? Now, Descript, I use that to clean up the filler words if I need to. My take on filler words, I really just kind of leave them in, but I mainly use Descript for... I use it mainly for the YouTube shorts. I've been playing with this. I've been testing this, and with consistency, with the shorts and my ability to upload into YouTube, it has shown a difference in the visibility of my channel. Now, keep in mind, it's the visibility of my channel. Does that translate into new views on my long form videos? If I'm setting it up right, yes, it will in the long term set up more views in the long term for my long form videos. But I can't give you an accurate analysis of whether or not shorts is good for a podcast or not. But what I am looking for is to be able to help people out in short form content and lead them to the long form content eventually. That's the idea. So that's why I am using Descript, all right? So ask yourself the questions, are you manually transcribing your episodes? I mean, you shouldn't be at this point. If you are, you need to stop. All right, definitely stop and start considering using the AI tools with Descript or TurboScribe. All right. Number 2, you can use the AI to instantly create the social media post. I love this feature inside of TurboScribe because it's generating it almost instantly, right? You just copy it. It's going to give you some options. You take that transcription, and then there's a menu on the right-hand side of TurboScribe, and it'll say Chat GPT, I forget what it's called. It says Chat GPT summarize. You click on that, and then it will pop up a pop-up window, and it'll give you options. It'll say okay, do you want to create a blog post? Do you want to create a short summary, a detailed summary? Do you want to create a social media post, or do you want to create your own post? And all you got to do is click on one of those, and it will populate the prompt that you're looking to go ahead and plug into Chat GPT. And it's not just one prompt. It will give you, because transcriptions can be super duper long, right? They can be way long. And so it will chunk all of those out and create the prompt for you so that you can go ahead and create this workflow of, okay, I'm going to just copy, paste into ChatGPT, copy, paste into ChatGPT, and then it's going to give you all of that content, and it will provide to you what you need in terms of whatever content you're looking for. So that may be a blog post. And we can get into blog posts here in a second, but it can be a blog post. It can be the social media content that you're looking for. So just kind of look at that and think about that. There's no more thinking about captions. It's all done for you. So don't overcomplicate the process of your social media content. Just try to find the right workflow. All right. Number 3, let's plan for repurposing while recording. So I've mentioned this in the last episode that you've got to be thinking about the sound bites inside of your podcast. So start thinking about how you can incorporate those into your content so that you can create these sound bites that you can utilize for YouTube shorts, TikToks, Reels, whatever it may be. All right. And then here's the idea. You also got to remember this. You want to write show notes with shareable takeaways in mind, okay? Write them with shareable takeaways in mind, or maybe just give them the opportunity to see bullet points of what they will take away from this particular episode, all right? So when we write our show notes, we're just trying to say, hey, okay, it's like a Netflix style show note format, but we want them to have a takeaway and what is going to encourage them to listen to this particular podcast episode. That's what's important, I think, all right? So just kind of think about that and think about your repurposing of content while you're recording, or maybe think about how can I structure that after the actual podcast is recorded. Now, this is something that I'm still trying to work on, batching, point number 4, batching and automating the workflow. I think this is a struggle for all podcasters. And I would say that it's not just something that, it's not that you're not trying. It's just a matter of trying to find the right time. As an example, earlier this week, I got some really, really difficult news when it came down to my living situation. As you know, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that I've had challenges with family, right? And so, and having to travel to go see family and help them out. Well, then now that has calmed down, right? Life happens, and you're like, oh my gosh. And so now a living situation has popped up in my life and might require me to, have to move from my property and go to a different property. And this creates challenges, right? You're trying to batch your content and you're trying to get ahead of the game, but it can become difficult. Try to remember and remind yourself and not be too hard on yourself that while you're creating this content, just do your best to try to batch out the contents. If you can batch them out 4 weeks in advance, 5 weeks in advance, great. And maybe what you need to do is you need to rethink how long your content is. I've done that definitely with myself. I've had to think, okay, well, I'm going to just record an hour-long podcast. But then I think to myself, my audience probably wants shorter content. Maybe they want a half-hour podcast, or maybe they want a 40-minute podcast that's still delivering great on content. So you might want to start thinking about how you structure that. And of course, the behaviors of consumption of how we consume this content, that's maybe something that you also need to think about as well. So batch your content the best that you can, because this will help you create the best possible outcome when it comes down to promoting your podcast. Schedule posts in advance. Batching just doesn't happen with podcast recording. Batching also happens with the recording with publishing the social media posts that you created inside of TurboScribe using a tool like Buffer. In fact, from the days in which I started using Buffer many, many years ago to now, Buffer has really improved their platform. And so and I think one of the things that I like about Buffer is that it publishes automatically to something like Threads. Threads doesn't have a native scheduler inside of it. So utilizing something like Buffer works. And I've been testing and doing some tests on this, and it really does help out. And the engagement starts coming towards me, which I was blown away by. I mean, just like by 3 or 4 posts, I was pretty surprised by how Buffer helps me out there. But you have to remember, when you're doing something that is embedded with engagement using Buffer, you have to engage back on those platforms. So just as a heads up, you just can't let it publish and then just forget about it. People will respond back to you, and you want to make sure that you're getting back to them. Okay. But you going back to the batching and automation for your social media, you can use templates for captions, blog posts, just maybe some episode highlights that you can get from TurboScribe. All right. So ask yourself the question, what's one step in your process that you can automate today that can make it easier? Can you start creating these pieces of content from TurboScribe and then plugging them into something like Buffer? That might be an option for you. Okay. So let's go ahead and reevaluate your systems and think about what your systems look like. All right. So now if we were to return to John's question and ask some reflective questions about this, all right, ask yourself the question, like, how well is your current repurposing strategy? Is it working for you, or are you even trying to create a repurposing strategy? Don't get too hard on yourself when it comes down to this. Don't think that you have to start it immediately. You can start doing this gradually, right? You don't have to have a complete plan that's laid out for you, step by step, framework by framework. All it takes sometimes is just for you to go ahead and get started. Just start, get an account with Buffer, and then, collect all the information that you need from TurboScribe or maybe even Descript, and then start plugging it into Buffer and have it drive directly to either the podcast episode or your podcast website, depending on what your objective is. And I highly recommend that you go check out my objectives episode. That's the episode that I keep going back to. Go back to your objective and figure out what your objective is for that podcast so that you can drive people to your website or your podcast episode. I'm going to leave a link. Where is it? Over here. I'm going to leave a link over here in the top left-hand corner, or I think it's top right-hand corner of your screen if you're on YouTube, and you can listen to that episode on objectives. All right. Now, next question would be like, what's stopping you from automating parts of your content process? Is it time? Is it family? What is that? All right. Now, I understand time. We just gave an example of a time constraint that I am dealing with right now. The time constraint is really more about me looking to find a new place to live. All right. I own my own place. I own a condo, but it's just not something that I can do right now. And as life happens, we have to start looking to responding to life as opposed to reacting to life, right? So when we respond, better and we start putting up an action plan in play, it allows other areas of our life to open up so that we can create that content. So asking the question again, what's stopping you from automating parts of your content process? Maybe it's an example like what I'm giving you right now. You just are pressed for time. Try not to be too hard on yourself. Just do a little bit every day as you can. I've been doing that. I've been learning so much about my own podcast, especially publishing it on YouTube. I've been learning so much about like the expectations that I've had versus what reality actually is. So just think about that. Don't be hard on yourself because you will need to adjust as the content that you create will adjust as well. Okay. So I want to ask you some final questions to adjust your approach. All right. What's one platform or content type that you can focus on instead of trying to do everything? So like in my instance, I'm thinking more along the lines of, I keep going back and forth. I mean, last episode I said, I'm not playing on Threads, or now I'm playing on Threads. I think you just have to be open to the idea that there's going to be change. And now that there is this opportunity for me to share content onto Threads, I will now lean into that a little bit more. So like for me, the platform that I might lean into more will be Threads, and I might be doing more on LinkedIn as well, just to get the content out there, right? Number 2, how can you incorporate AI tools into your workflow to save time? Are the AI tools really more for you to do the editing on video, or is it more about the transcriptions itself? Do you need more accurate transcriptions? Do you need the prompts? Do you need, that's really what you're looking for, is you're looking for the right workflow. So how can you incorporate the AI tools that will help you create better content to save time? All right. Number 3, what's one task you can delegate or automate starting today? What can you start doing today? Or can you delegate it off to someone else? Maybe you have a podcast where it's you and another friend. Maybe you can delegate the TurboScribe transcripts and the social media buffer stuff to them while you work on focusing on the editing and publishing of the podcast. As long as you have that transcript, the other stuff can be done by someone else. But if you're doing it all on your own, you might need to figure out better steps. Like you need to figure out the workflow, the steps in order to take so that you can create that content. All right. Number 4, what does your content directly connect with your audience's biggest challenges? All right. So, I should say this. How does your content directly connect with your audience's biggest challenges? So are you creating these prompts, or are these prompts being created by helping people or entertaining them? Think about how the content directly connects with the audience's biggest challenges or how you want to entertain them. That might be something created inside of ChatGPT where you position the prompt a little bit different, right? Number 5, what's one change today that you can make right now to feel a lot more confident in repurposing your repurpose process, all right? So what's one change you can make right now to feel more confident in repurposing your process? Maybe that change is in your editing process of the podcast recording. Maybe it's all in the podcast recording itself. But what is really going to move the needle for you to start getting your podcast content out there, for people to notice it, for the algorithm to pick up on it and be like, oh yeah, this guy shares nothing but podcast content? Think about how that's going to work out for yourself. Okay. So I want to reassure you in this particular instance. All right. I want to give you a couple of reassurances with this particular topic. Repurposing content doesn't have to be overwhelming. It can be at times, and I understand where you might be coming from, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You just have to figure out how to leverage the AI to work in your favor. So in my instance, it's utilizing TurboScribe and Descript at the same time because it helps simplify my process. It might be using 2 apps, but it's simplifying the process in the long run. And it's helping me create the content that will help my podcast grow over time and will drive people to the assets that I want them to go to over time. All right. So I want you to think about today's questions, the reflection questions. Go back and listen to this podcast episode. Think about what you can do about leveraging the tools and leveraging your mindset or shifting your mindset to create a better podcast. So pick one simple change today. It's all you got to do. Just one simple change in your process. And what does that simple change, what does it look like? And how can it improve the visibility, getting that podcast out there? Okay. So I hope this answers John's question. John, I hope this answers your question. And for everyone who's listening right now, or anyone who's listening right now, let me know, like, what tools are you using to repurpose your content. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment down in the section below and let me know, or you can shoot me an email on my website, or you can hit me up on Threads, LinkedIn. I'm on those platforms as well. And I'm more than happy to answer those questions, or actually to see what you say. If you do have a question though, I will say this: I encourage you to leave a comment on YouTube, because it helps the video get out into the algorithm a little bit better. And your comments aren't just comments. They are tools for other people to read into, so that it will help them based on your experiences. So the comments on my YouTube channel are very, very valuable. I will take email, but let's just try to comment, all right? And of course, if you're feeling stuck and trying to figure out how to start a podcast, make sure you download my essential equipment guide to starting up a podcast. It gives you all the equipment that you need to start up a podcast, the tools, software that you need, and of course, maybe even a few other little details that will improve the launch of your podcast. So in the meantime, I thank you so much for listening to the podcast episode today for the Podcast Therapist. Means a lot to me. And of course, as you're listening to this on audio, you won't know that I'm actually doing this right now on video. I have created an end screen for my videos for my podcast. So in the meantime, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Thanks for watching and listening to this week's episode of the Podcast Therapist. We'll see you next time.